Hello everyone, we are back with another video, but this time I thought of discussing something else rather than discussing the grammar rules. I thought of delving into English literature in this video, and as my first video on English literature, I thought of choosing the genre Indian writing in English. It is one of my favorite genres because I feel that Indian writing in English is an emblem of power, symbol of, a struggle to seek identity in a master's world, because this genre did not emerge as a writing style but rather as a weapon for the Indians who received English education during the colonial times. So, as my first lesson on literature, today I will be dealing with a poetry by an Indian writer. Okay. The Indian, what I feel, the Indian writers writing in English, especially during the colonial times, they chose to write in this particular language, English, which was the master's language during that time, because they wanted to talk about their struggles, to talk about the mass of India, and thus uphold the essence of their motherland universally. And among many Indian writers writing in English during the colonial rule, Sarojini Naidu was one among those writers who not only talked about the various colors of India, the various colors and the various people of India. Yes, she talked about the various colors and people of India, but along with this, rather, what was more important was she was also a person whose contribution made a lot difference for women in a country where they were simply treated as nurturers. Now, one of the major themes of her poetry was the folk theme. Sarojini Naidu, she talked about many things, but among everything, what was the most prominent in her poetry was the folk theme. She talked about the rural mass, because the rural mass even till this date comprise the majority of India. That particular section, that particular mass is what stands for India's true essence, true color. because without that section, the urban world, I don't think would have survived. So Sarojini Naidu talked about the folk life of India, and Palanquin Bearers is one such poem. She wrote quite a few poems dealing with many themes, and among them I chose to talk about Palanquin Bearers today. I chose to discuss Palanquin Bearers. It is one such poem that paints the picture of the palanquin bearers, okay, the people who carried palanquins, the people who carried aristocratic ladies in palanquins during the colonial times, okay. So this is a poem that talks about these people who definitely comprised a section of the then India. So today's discussion will be on Palanquin Bearers by Sarojini Naidu. Now in this video, today I will be talking about the background of the poem. I'll be discussing about the themes that that which Sarojini Naidu dealt with, and in my next video I will be getting into the poem, rather the explanation of the poem. But today I will be talking about the history, the background of the Palanquin Bearers as a section of the society, and of course the historical background of the times. I'll talk about the times during which Sarojini Naidu wrote. Now, to start with, the very first thing that I would like to mention is that in the 19th century India, okay, 19th century India, people on the move were a significant visual reminder of class and caste differences. Okay, you can take down these things as running notes. You can make note of these points. Okay, so in the 19th century India, people on the move were a reminder of class and caste differences. They were reminders of class and caste differences. Okay. Right. Now those who were better placed in life and in society, of course, they used various modes of transportation. Apart from the affluent classes, the mass of people, their main mode of communication or transport was walking. They walked during those times, people. But the people who were better placed in lives, they used various modes of transport, and it was a tradition Okay, it was a tradition in the colonial times, in colonial India, to carry Indian brides of the aristocratic families on palanquins. Okay, so it was a tradition. It was a tradition to carry Indian brides of the aristocratic families on palanquins. Okay, on palanquins. Now, what was a palanquin? Like most of you must be knowing, a palanquin was, a box-like structure which was carried by 4 men or guards on their shoulders, who were better known as the Palanquin Bearers. Okay, now these men used to carry the ladies, rather for me, okay, as far as my understanding goes, I would rather say these men, they used to carry the honor of the ladies under protection over long distances, and it was said that in order to make the journeys less tiresome, the palanquin bearers used to hum musical rhythms among themselves. In order to make the journeys less tiresome, the palanquin bearers used to hum musical rhythms among themselves. Okay, now during those days when women were considered to be burdens to their parents and the society, it was a time during which women were thought to be very delicate and fragile. These palanquin bearers felt proud about carrying the ladies of their lords. It was their duty to protect the esteem of the women who were symbols of respect and honor to them. Women were as pure as Mother Nature herself to these men who were conferred with the job of carrying the responsibility of women's safety in ancient India. These men, as I said, they considered, or rather they thought themselves to be very lucky to be conferred with the duty of carrying the ladies, the aristocratic ladies, to their in-laws' house. So these palanquin bearers felt proud of their job of carrying the ladies under their protection, because as I said, they didn't just carry the women, they actually carried their honor, they carried their it was with them that the protection of these ladies were kept. So Now, one wouldn't, as far as I think one would not be very wrong if one calls their job to have been heroic, because during these long journeys they used to face many kinds of danger, and it was the duty of these men to protect the ladies from those dangers, like the very common danger was definitely confronting the dacoits or the burglars during those time, the looters, and really these men were the only people who used to protect and save their the ladies of their masters. Okay, so the Palanquin Bearers, the poem Palanquin Bearers by Sarojini Naidu is an ode to such palanquin bearers who were proud of who they were and felt honored to do what their job demanded them to do. So the poem Palanquin Bearers by Sarojini Naidu is an ode to the palanquin bearers of the colonial India. Okay, now the poem celebrates the story of a journey the poem celebrates the story of a journey undertaken by such men, by the palanquin bearers, with a bride whom they were carrying in their palanquin. And in order to do so, Sarojini Naidu, in order to celebrate this story, Sarojini Naidu chose to use such expressions that impart a melody and rhythm to the poem, which makes the poem picturesque in itself. Okay, so Sarojini Naidu chose to use such expressions that impart a melody and rhythm that makes the poem picturesque in itself. Now, Sarojini Naidu, for me, stands as one of the most remarkable poets after Rabindranath Tagore. Now, it is completely my idea. Okay, you may differ, You may differ in this thought, but I feel, right after Rabindranath Tagore, Sarojini Naidu stands as one of the most remarkable poets of the colonial India, because she belonged to the era when Indo-English literature was establishing its identity as a mode of taking the stories of India across the whole world. As I said, in Indian writing in English, rather Indo-English literature was the only medium through which the educated class or the writers of our country could talk about our motherland to the whole world, because until and unless they start writing in a language that was universally recognized, they couldn't make their struggles felt to the whole world, right? So Indo-English literature was establishing its identity as a mode of establishing India on a universal level. So and Sarojini, and poets like Sarojini Naidu, through their writing, they did this job. Now, Sarojini Naidu's poetry, mediated, okay? It mediated between the usually opposing but sometimes complementary forces of the English poetic tradition, so and her Indian sensibility. So her poetry was, it acted as a bridge between, okay, Indian sensibility and the English writing style. Okay, you can take down this point if you feel like. So her poetry mediated between the usually opposing. Why opposing? Because English language was definitely was not favored by the Indian masses. It was their master's language. It was a language of those people who who presented themselves as tyrants to the Indians, to the millions of Indians during those times. So definitely English language was not something which was welcomed by most of the Indians. So that's why I'm using this phrase or this expression, the usually opposing, but sometimes definitely it was complementary forces of the English poetic tradition, okay, the tradition which the English poets followed, okay, so that tradition and her Indian sensibility, okay, so her writing style not only depended on her Indian sensibility, but also on the English poetic tradition. Okay, this is what this point means. Her poetry mediated between the usually opposing but sometimes complementary forces of the English poetic tradition and her Indian sensibility. Her poems, now this is a very important thing which I should mention over here. Her poems were lyrical in nature, you know, they were very melodious, they were very lyrical in nature, and this was one of the reasons why she was given, or rather she was conferred, okay, with the title Nightingale of India. She was called the Nightingale of India. Okay, so her poems were very lyrical in nature. Naidu's poems were very lyrical and melodious. Now, what do you mean by lyrical and melodious? Do you think the poems they they used to they used to produce music in them? No, the words, the expressions which she used, it like while you read, because a poetry should be read aloud always. When one reads out her poems, they might not produce music as you get to hear in songs, okay, but it definitely, her poetry definitely produces a rhythm, okay, it definitely produces an interesting melody in the words, in the lines, in the verses that she created. Okay, so the poems were very lyrical and melodious. Maybe for this reason, okay, she was called the Nightingale of India. Okay, and as I said, all her poems, they carried a distinct Indian imagery in most of them. Okay, most of the poems, they were very much Indian. Okay, they carried a great Indianness in them. Now, what do I mean by Indianness? All her poems, all her lines, all the verses that she wrote only talked about the extravagance of India as a country, as a land of colors, a land of people, a land of various professions. It talked about the beauties of India. It talked about the love for nature, the love for beauty that prevailed and prevails even till this date for India. The spirit of brotherhood, the love for motherland. All these were the themes that around which her poems rotated and revolved. Okay, so her poems were very much Indian in nature. Naidu's poems were very much Indian in nature. Okay, she was successful in drawing very realistic pictures of Indian sites. Naidu was successful in drawing, okay? She had drawn or etched very realistic, like her characters of her poems were very realistic, you can find them all her characters were from day-to-day life. Everyone, they were from all the professions that you see around. Rather, all her characters were us, all her characters were we, us, the Indians. Okay, her poems talked about us, her poems talked about we, the Indians. So Indian sites, okay, they were very realistic. In nature. Sights and scenes, and she could incorporate the folk tone and folk rhythm in her verses. Now, her poem Palanquin Bearers not only presents a pretty picture of a dying feudal order of colonialism, but also glorifies the existence of the Palanquin Bearers as a section of the colonial India, because it was through poets like Sarojini Naidu, it was through these writings that the various sections of the society were presented before the world. Otherwise these people who were normally kept at a bay, though they form the majority of the mass of this country, yet most of the time they are not being talked about. They are always kept at a bay. They are rather the subalterns, okay. It is most often it is said that these people, though they have a mouth to speak, yet they are kept dumb, because of course because of the economic strata to which they belong. Okay, now it was through Sarojini Naidu's poems that this section, okay, of India got represented universally. Okay, so this poem in particular, that is Palanquin Bearer, it not only represents the poem Palanquin Bearers, not only presents a picture of a dying feudal order of the colonial India, but it also glorifies the existence of Palanquin bearers as a section of the society, of the then society. Now these men, that is these, the Palanquin bearers, they may remind us of Kipling's India, but what makes the poem so strong as a representation of the society is that they are presented not as faded types but as live individuals acting out their humanity in the general drama of life with its fluctuating tides of joy and sorrow. So the next point that needs to be remembered is that the poem not only talks about these men. Now this point should be remembered, that is, these palanquin, rather the poem, it is, it not only represents the palanquin bearers as a section of the society, okay. They might remind, as I said, these men may remind us of, the palanquin bearers may remind us of Kipling's India, but this is not the reason why this poem is so celebrated, okay. But this is not the reason why this poem stands out so strong as in its features. For me, I feel that what makes the poem so strong is that these people are presented, okay, these palanquin bearers are presented not only as a faded type, okay, not only as a faded type, a class of people who no longer existence, a job that no longer exists in India, but so they are not presented as people who have faded out from our society, but rather they are presented as live individuals. This is very, very important, okay. Not only the palanquin bearers, but all the other characters, as I said, of Sarojini Naidu's poetry, okay, all the characters, be it the bangle sellers, the Indian weavers, so they all are presented as live individuals. Live individuals means when you read, you go through the lines, okay, you can see them in front of you, you can feel them actually, okay, you can feel them, you can empathize with these sections of people, okay. So as when you go out in the morning, as you can see the vendors selling the vegetables out there, similarly while you go through the lines, you can actually visualize these characters in front of you, okay. So this is what this particular feature, or rather this style, which Sarojini Naidu had shown, made her poems so strong, okay. So they were presented as live individuals acting out. What do you mean by, so as I explained, what do you mean by live individuals? The characters always act out, okay, act out their humanity in the general drama, of life, okay, in the general drama of life, with its fluctuating tides of joy and sorrow. Most interestingly, Sarojini Naidu dealt not with outmoded or faded types, but quintessentially with figures who had so far been ignored and thus found an existence in her poetry, emerging from folk life to claim a place in the world of literature. So with this, I wrap up this video. In my next video, I will be getting into the explanation, rather the line by line explanation of the poem Palanquin Bearers. Till then, you keep watching and keep learning. If you know, and as I always say in every video, if you do found any doubt, please write in the comment section. And if you need any other help, like I will be trying my level best to provide you with most of the things which most of the tricky things, okay, but apart from the things which there are quite a few which we might skip. So those things, you please come up with such topics, you come up with things on which you need help and write them down in the comment section, okay. And till then, so you go through this video over and over again, learn up the introduction, and wait for the explanation of the poem in our next video, okay. Thank you.